had seen plenty of strange things during his 15 years in the Galactic Defense Corps, but nothing quite prepared him for the sight of his new assignment posting. Outpost Zeta-7 floated like a metallic jellyfish against the backdrop of three purple moons, its bioluminescent panels pulsing with an alien rhythm that made his human eyes water. The transport shuttle's pilot, a gruff with scales that rattled when he spoke, barely looked up from his navigation console. "First time on a mixed-species station, human?" the pilot asked, his voice carrying that distinctive whistle that all reptilian species seem to share. "Hope you brought your patients. The little ones can be quite energetic." Adjusted his duffel bag and peered through the viewport as they approached the docking bay. The station was massive, easily 3 times larger than any human outpost he'd served on. Streams of various species moved through transparent corridors that snaked around the station's exterior like veins. He could make out the hulking forms of the ethereal wisps of Etherian energy beings and dozens of other species he couldn't immediately identify. "Little ones?" asked, though he was fairly certain he didn't want to know the answer. The pilot's laugh sounded like gravel in a cement mixer. "Whole stations crawling with them. They're the tech specialists here, about this big." He held up his clawed hands, indicating something roughly the size of a house cat. "Smart as quantum computers and twice as mischievous. Command didn't tell you." Felt his stomach drop. In his experience, when command didn't tell you something important, it usually meant you weren't going to like it. "No, they just said I was being assigned to equipment maintenance and that I'd have a roommate." "Oh, you'll have a roommate, all right," the pilot chuckled as the shuttle settled into the docking clamps with a resonant thunk. "Good luck, human. You're going to need it." The airlock cycled through its sequence with mechanical precision and stepped onto Outpost Zeta-7 for the first time. The station's artificial gravity was set slightly lighter than Earth standard, making each step feel bouncy and uncertain. The air carried a mixture of scents he couldn't identify, something floral, something metallic, and something that reminded him of ozone after a thunderstorm. Commander was waiting for him at the airlock, her 4 arms moving in what had learned was a traditional greeting. Her blue-tinged skin gleamed under the station's lighting, and her large, multifaceted eyes seemed to take in everything about him at once. "Welcome to Zeta-7, technician," she said, her translator device rendering her words in crisp, formal English. "I trust your journey was acceptable." "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for having me aboard." "Your reputation precedes you," Commander continued as she began walking, her long legs covering ground quickly enough that had to hurry to keep up. 17 successful equipment recoveries in hostile environments, 12 innovations to standard maintenance protocols, and most impressively, you managed to keep the atmospheric processors running on station during the siege of the Helix Nebula when 3 other species engineers had declared the situation impossible. Felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I just did my job, ma'am. Sometimes you have to think outside the regulations when lives are on the line." "Indeed, that is precisely why you are here." She paused at a junction where the corridor branched in 5 different directions, each marked with symbols from various galactic languages. "Zeta-7 serves as a critical monitoring station for this sector. We track subspace communications, monitor for pirate activity, and serve as an early warning system for 3 different solar systems. Our equipment must function flawlessly." They took the second corridor to the right, passing through sections that were clearly designed for different species. The ceiling height varied dramatically, and noticed that the lighting spectrum shifted subtly as they moved from area to area. Some sections hummed with barely audible frequencies that made his teeth itch. "The challenge," Commander continued, "is that our equipment incorporates technology from 15 different species. What works perfectly for engineering often conflicts with Etherian energy systems. Durability standards sometimes interfere with precision requirements. It requires someone with an unusual ability to see connections across different technological philosophies." "And you think humans can do that?" "I think you can do that." She stopped in front of a door marked with symbols didn't recognize. "Your species has a peculiar talent for synthesizing disparate approaches into functional solutions. Most species develop technology along fairly predictable lines, based on their evolutionary history and cognitive patterns. Humans seem to ignore such limitations." The door slid open to reveal what appeared to be new quarters. The room was larger than he'd expected, with 2 distinct living areas separated by a raised platform in the center. One area was clearly sized for a human, normal-height furniture, a bed, a work desk. The other area featured furniture that looked like it had been designed for a child, scaled down to perhaps 1/4 normal size. "Your roommate's situation is unique," Commander said, and caught what he thought might be amusement in her translated tone. "Normally live in communal clusters of 20 to 30 individuals. However, your roommate, designated as Pip in your linguistic patterns, specifically requested individual quarters." Requested. Pip is what you might term a technological prodigy, even by standards. Most specialize in 1 or 2 areas of technology. Pip demonstrates mastery across 7 different technological disciplines. However, this individual also exhibits behavioral patterns that others find disruptive. Set his duffel bag down carefully. What kind of disruptive? Pip tends to take apart and rebuild technology for fun. Last week, Pip completely redesigned the waste recycling system without permission, improving efficiency by 37%, but causing 3 days of confusion while everyone learned the new interface. The week before, Pip somehow convinced the environmental controls that the quarters needed to be kept at comfort levels, resulting in 17 cases of mild hypothermia. So Pip is basically a mad scientist. That translation seems approximately accurate, Commander confirmed. However, Pip's innovations have also prevented 2 major system failures and solved a communication interference problem that had puzzled our best engineers for months. Command decided that the benefits outweigh the complications. As if summoned by their conversation, a small panel in the wall of the tiny living area slid open, and something emerged. His first impression was of a cross between a hummingbird and a spider, but as his eyes adjusted, he realized he was looking at something far more complex. The creature stood about 8 inches tall on 4 incredibly delicate legs that seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal. Its torso was roughly humanoid, but covered in what looked like tiny scales that shifted color as it moved. 4 arms extended from its shoulders, each ending in hands with fingers so fine they resembled silver thread. But it was the creature's head that captured its attention. Large, multifaceted eyes dominated a face that was somehow both alien and oddly expressive. A crest of what might have been feathers or possibly fiber-optic filaments crowned its head, currently glowing a soft blue color. The commander said formally, "Meet Pip." The tiny creature looked up with those enormous eyes and had the distinct impression he was being evaluated. Pip's head tilted to one side, then the other, like a bird examining something interesting. The crest shifted from blue to green to gold. Then Pip spoke and nearly jumped out of his skin. "You are significantly larger than the dimensional specifications suggested," Pip said in perfect, unaccented English. The voice was high and musical, but clearly intelligent. "Also, your electromagnetic signature is quite unusual. Most humans register much lower on the theta band frequencies." Pip spent considerable time studying human technological records in preparation for your arrival, Commander explained. "Learn languages through technological interfaces rather than traditional study methods." "I have been anticipating this collaboration," Pip continued, beginning to walk around in a small circle. "Your species' approach to problem-solving demonstrates fascinating nonlinear thinking patterns. I have several hypotheses about why human technology develops along such unpredictable vectors." Found himself crouching down to get closer to Pip's level, which seemed to please the tiny alien. "What kind of hypotheses?" Pip's crest brightened considerably. "Human neural architecture appears optimized for pattern recognition across multiple sensory inputs simultaneously. Most species develop cognitive specializations, excel at structural analysis, process mathematical relationships with extraordinary precision, demonstrate superior multivariable logic coordination. And humans? Humans appear to excel at seeing connections that shouldn't exist," Pip said with what thought might be excitement. "Your technological history shows repeated instances of breakthroughs achieved by combining previously unrelated concepts. Steam power combined with transportation, electromagnetic theory combined with communication, digital processing combined with biological pattern recognition." Felt a grin spreading across his face. "You've been studying human engineering philosophy." "Extensively. I find it quite fascinating that your species consistently achieves results that violate standard technological progression models. According to most galactic development theories, humans should not have achieved faster-than-light travel for at least another 3 centuries. "We have a saying," said, "when something is impossible, we haven't tried hard enough yet." Pip made a sound that might have been laughter, a musical trill that reminded of wind chimes. "Yes, I have encountered that sentiment in several human cultural databases. It appears to be a defining characteristic." Commander's translator device emitted what was learning to recognize as a polite cough. "I will leave you to settle in. Duty assignments begin at 600 station time. Pip will provide you with a tour of the technical sections." She paused at the door. "Technician, I should mention that Pip has been working on a project that Command has not yet approved. I trust you will exercise appropriate judgment." After the commander left, found himself alone with his tiny roommate. Pip had climbed onto what appeared to be a custom-built desk sized for someone 8 inches tall, complete with multiple view screens and input devices that looked like they'd been grown rather than manufactured. "Appropriate judgment," Pip repeated, and caught what he thought was amusement in the musical voice. "Commander has a tendency toward excessive caution regarding innovative approaches." "What kind of project are you working on?" Pip's crest shifted to a warm orange color. "I have been analyzing the station's defensive capabilities. Our current shield generators operate on 7 different technological principles created by 5 different species. The integration is functional but inelegant." "Inelegant how?" "Observe." Pip manipulated something on the tiny desk, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them. Found himself looking at a 3-dimensional schematic of the station's defensive systems. The deflector arrays operate by creating localized gravitational distortions. The energy barriers function through controlled electromagnetic field manipulation. The human-designed armor plating relies on molecular-level structural engineering. Studied the display, noting the complex interaction points where different systems interfaced. "They're not really working together, are they? They're just layered on top of each other." "Precisely." Pip's excitement was obvious, the crest now cycling through multiple colors. "Each system operates independently, which means we are using perhaps 40% of the potential defensive capability, but if the systems could be properly integrated." The holographic display shifted, and watched as the separate defensive layers began to merge and interact in the simulation. The improvement was dramatic. Coverage increased, power efficiency improved, and overall protective capability more than doubled. "This is incredible," breathed, "but I'm guessing there's a problem." "Several problems," Pip admitted, the crest dimming slightly. "First, the integration would require modifications to systems from 5 different species. Each species has specific protocols about modifications to their technology. Second, the project would require unprecedented cooperation between engineering teams that typically work in isolation. Third, Commander believes the risk of system failure during integration outweighs the potential benefits." Continued studying the holographic display, noting the elegance of Pip's proposed solution. "How long have you been working on this?" "Approximately 4 months. I have run 47,000 different simulation scenarios. The failure rate in controlled implementation is less than 0.3%. And Command still won't approve it." "Command finds my previous unauthorized modifications concerning," Pip said with what thought might be embarrassment. "There have been some incidents. The waste recycling system. Among others, I may have been somewhat overenthusiastic in my approach to improvement projects." Found himself laughing despite the situation. "Pip, I think you and I are going to get along just fine." The tiny alien looked up at him with those enormous, multifaceted eyes. "You are not concerned about unauthorized technical modifications." "I'm concerned about whether they work," said. "Sometimes the best solutions come from ignoring what you're supposed to do and focusing on what needs to be done." Pip's crest blazed with brilliant white light. "I believe this collaboration will prove most productive." As began unpacking his gear, he had the distinct feeling that his quiet assignment to a monitoring station was about to become significantly more complicated. But looking at the innovative genius of Pip's defensive integration proposal, he also suspected it was about to become the most interesting assignment of his career. The next morning would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, woke to the sound of something that might have been singing, if singing could involve harmonic frequencies that seemed to resonate in his bones. The station's artificial dawn cycle was just beginning, casting the quarters in a soft blue glow that gradually shifted toward something resembling Earth sunlight. He sat up in his bed and looked around for the source of the music. Pip was perched on the edge of the tiny desk, apparently conducting an orchestra only the small alien could see. The musical sounds were coming from Pip's crest, which had extended into dozens of fiber-optic filaments that danced and swayed in complex patterns. Watched, fascinated, as the patterns seemed to correspond to different musical tones. "Good morning," said quietly, not wanting to interrupt what appeared to be some kind of meditation or artistic expression. The music stopped abruptly, and Pip's crest contracted back to its normal size. "Good morning. I apologize if my morning harmonic exercises disturbed your sleep cycle." "Not at all, that was beautiful. Is it traditional music?" "It is a mathematical interpretation of yesterday's sensor data converted to auditory frequencies," Pip explained matter-of-factly. "I find it helps me process complex information while maintaining aesthetic appreciation for data patterns." Blinked, you turn sensor readings into music. All information contains inherent patterns. Musical interpretation often reveals relationships that purely analytical approaches miss. Pip hopped down from the desk with surprising grace for something so small. For instance, yesterday's gravitational sensor data, when converted to harmonic frequencies, revealed a recurring pattern that suggests a cloaked ship has been maintaining position approximately 0.3 light seconds from the station. That got's full attention. He swung his legs out of bed and reached for his uniform. "A cloaked ship. Did you report this?" "I submitted the data to Security Chief 6 hours ago. However, my report was classified as unsubstantiated speculation based on non-standard analytical methods." Pip's tone suggested this was not an uncommon response to the small alien's reports. "Show me," said, pulling on his boots. Pip manipulated the holographic display system, and the air above the tiny desk filled with a three-dimensional representation of local space. Streams of data flowed through the display like colored ribbons, representing various types of sensor input. "Standard analysis would process each data stream independently," Pip explained, highlighting different colored streams. "However, when you convert the gravitational data to audio frequencies and overlay it with electromagnetic readings." The streams began to merge and interact, and could see what Pip meant. There was definitely a pattern there, a recurring disruption that moved in a way consistent with an artificial object trying to remain hidden. "This is solid evidence," said, studying the display. "Why wouldn't security take it seriously?" "Because it requires acknowledging that musical data interpretation is a valid analytical method," Pip said, with what was learning to recognize as frustration. "Most species prefer to stick with proven analytical approaches rather than risk embarrassment from unconventional methods." Finished dressing and grabbed a protein bar from his supplies. "What's our first assignment today?" "Routine maintenance on the primary communication array," Pip said, climbing onto his shoulder with casual ease. "However, I have been reviewing the maintenance protocols, and I believe there may be opportunities for improvement." "What kind of improvements?" "The communication array currently operates at 67% efficiency due to harmonic interference between different transmission systems. I have identified several modifications that could increase efficiency to 92%. Paused at the door to their quarters. "Let me guess, unauthorized modifications." "The modifications would be well within standard safety parameters," Pip said defensively. "They would simply require creative interpretation of existing protocols." "Pip, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but maybe we should start with regular maintenance first. Get a feel for the systems before we start revolutionizing them." The tiny alien was quiet for a moment and felt a small hand pat his ear in what he thought might be an affectionate gesture. "You are wise to counsel patience. I sometimes become overly eager to implement improvements." They made their way through the station's corridors and was struck by how different everything looked in the artificial daylight cycle. The areas he'd walked through yesterday with Commander were now bustling with activity as different species began their daily routines. A group of moved past them like a small mountain range in motion, their conversation sounding like distant thunder. Several Etherian energy beings flowed through specialized transparent tubes that ran alongside the regular corridors, their forms shifting between different states of matter as they traveled. "How long have you been on this station?" asked Pip as they walked. 14 months, 6 days, and approximately 4 hours, Pip replied with characteristic precision. I was assigned here after completing my advanced technological studies on Prime. This is my first long-term assignment working with other species. And how do you like it? It is educational. Most species have very specific ways of approaching problems. Build everything to last approximately forever. Optimize for mathematical elegance. Prioritize precision above all other considerations. And humans? Humans are the most unpredictable, Pip said with evident satisfaction. Yesterday, I observed engineer solve a power coupling problem by hitting it with a wrench until it worked properly. The solution was completely outside standard procedures, but it was effective. Laughed, sometimes the direct approach is the best approach. They arrived at the communication array maintenance bay to find they weren't alone. Engineer, a stocky woman with grease-stained coveralls and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else, was staring at an open control panel with obvious frustration. Morning called, "Problems with the array." Morning, and yeah, problems. She gestured at the panel with a tool that might have been a screwdriver if screwdrivers were designed by alien engineers. The harmonic interference is getting worse. Yesterday, we had crystal-clear communication with 3 sectors. Today, I can barely raise the orbital platform. Moved closer to examine the panel. The interior was a maze of components from different species, each designed according to different engineering philosophies. Components were massive and overbuilt, designed to function reliably for centuries. Elements were elegant and efficient, but required precise calibration. Human additions looked improvised but functional. When did the interference start getting worse? Pip asked from shoulder. About 3 weeks ago, replied. Been getting progressively worse every few days. Command keeps telling us to adjust the harmonic filters, but we're running out of room to compensate. May I examine the system logs? Pip asked politely. Looked skeptical. No offense, little guy, but this is human equipment. Your people design things differently. Actually, interjected, Pip has some interesting ideas about harmonic interference. Maybe we could take a look at the data together. Shrugged, can't hurt. System's not working properly anyway. Pip hopped down from shoulder and approached a data interface panel. Instead of using the standard input methods, the tiny alien extended several of the fiber optic filaments from its crest and connected directly to the system. Immediately, streams of data began flowing across nearby display screens. Fascinating, Pip murmured, apparently processing vast amounts of information simultaneously. The interference is not random. There is a definite pattern and it correlates with specific time periods. What kind of pattern? Asked, studying the displays. The interference peaks occur every 47 hours and 33 minutes. Each peak lasts approximately 6 hours and 22 minutes. The pattern has been consistent for exactly 23 days. Looked surprised. That's exactly when we've been having the worst problems. How did you figure that out so fast? Pattern recognition is a specialty, Pip explained, still connected to the system. However, the specific nature of this pattern suggests an external source. Felt pieces clicking together in his mind. Pip, is this the same time interval as that hidden ship you detected? Investigating correlation now. Pip's crest brightened as more data flowed across the screens. Yes, the communication interference peaks correspond exactly with periods when the gravitational anomaly is closest to our position. Someone's jamming our communications, realized. They're using some kind of interference field that cycles on and off. But why would they only jam us part of the time? Asked. Because constant jamming would be obvious, said, his mind racing. But intermittent interference that looks like equipment problems, that could go on for weeks without anyone realizing it was deliberate. Pip disconnected from the system and looked up at them with those enormous eyes. I believe the situation may be more serious than simple communication jamming. If I may access the station's defensive sensor logs, I can verify my hypothesis. I don't have clearance for that, said. That's security department stuff. But I might, said slowly. My maintenance clearance includes access to defensive systems for technical purposes. 10 minutes later, they were in the station's primary sensor control room, much to the obvious displeasure of the technician on duty. Lieutenant kept hissing under his breath as Pip connected to the sensor array and began pulling up data that hadn't been analyzed in weeks. What exactly are you looking for? Lieutenant demanded, his scales rattling with irritation. Confirmation of a hypothesis regarding coordinated surveillance and interference activities, Pip replied, apparently oblivious to the technician's hostility. Observe these readings. The main display filled with a complex three-dimensional map of local space, showing various ships, stations, and natural phenomena. But as Pip manipulated the data, certain patterns became visible. The hidden ship is not alone, Pip announced. There are at least 3 vessels maintaining coordinated positions around our station. They rotate positions every 47 hours, which explains why our sensors haven't detected a consistent signature. That's impossible, Lieutenant protested. Our sensors would detect multiple ships. Not if they are using advanced cloaking technology and coordinating their movements to exploit blind spots in our sensor coverage, said, studying the display. They're mapping our defenses. This is speculation, Lieutenant hissed. You cannot prove the existence of ships based on data anomalies and theoretical position calculations. Pip's crest shifted to a determined gold color. Perhaps not, but I can prove it by making them reveal themselves. What do you mean? Asked. The ships are maintaining position using microcorrections to their gravitational fields. If we create a specific type of electromagnetic pulse at precisely the right frequency, it will interfere with their cloaking generators for approximately 4.7 seconds. That's completely unauthorized, Lieutenant protested. You cannot generate experimental electromagnetic pulses without direct authorization from command. Actually, said with a growing grin, I think we can. Pip, what would we need to generate this pulse? The communication array that Engineer was repairing. If we modify the harmonic filters and reverse the interference cancellation protocols, we can create precisely the electromagnetic signature required. That would completely overload the communication system, Lieutenant objected. For 4.7 seconds, confirmed. And then we'd have proof of hostile surveillance, which I think Command might find more important than a brief communication interruption. Who had been listening to the entire conversation with growing excitement, grinned and cracked her knuckles. I love unauthorized modifications. When do we start? Lieutenant looked like he was about to have a cardiac event. I cannot permit this action without direct authorization from Security Chief. Then I suggest you contact Security Chief, said calmly. Because one way or another we're going to find out if there are hostile ships in our vicinity. As they headed back toward the communication array, Pip rode on shoulder again, the tiny alien's excitement obvious in the rapid color changes of its crest. Pip said quietly, I believe this partnership is going to be most educational for both of us. Found himself smiling as they walked through the corridors. Yesterday he'd been worried about a quiet assignment with an eccentric roommate. Today, he was potentially about to expose a hostile surveillance operation using unauthorized modifications to station equipment. Security Chief arrived at the communication array bay exactly 14 minutes after Lieutenant's panicked call, accompanied by Commander and what appeared to be half the station's senior staff. The Security Chief stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscle mass that suggested he could probably tear through the station's hull with his bare hands if sufficiently motivated. His expression as he surveyed the modified communication equipment did not suggest he was particularly pleased. Technician, Commander said in her carefully neutral tone, I understand you have been making unauthorized modifications to critical station systems. Yes, ma'am, replied, not bothering to deny the obvious. But I believe the circumstances justify the risk. The circumstances, Security Chief rumbled in a voice like distant avalanches, appear to be the theoretical existence of cloaked ships based on mathematical speculation with a documented history of unauthorized system modifications. Pip, who was still perched on shoulder, made a small chirping sound that was learning, meant the tiny alien was trying very hard not to say something that would make the situation worse. With respect, sir, said carefully, the evidence is more substantial than theoretical speculation. Pip has identified consistent patterns in our sensor data that strongly suggest coordinated surveillance activities. Patterns that no one else has detected, Lieutenant added from his position near the back of the group, clearly hopping to distance himself from the entire situation. That's because no one else thought to convert gravitational sensor data into audio frequencies and look for harmonic correlations, Engineer interjected. Which, now that I think about it, is actually pretty brilliant. Chief's massive head swiveled toward. Engineer, are you suggesting that this unauthorized modification will actually function as described? I'm saying the theory is sound, replied. We've modified the communication array to generate a specific electromagnetic pulse that should interfere with advanced cloaking technology. If there are ships out there, we'll see them for a few seconds. If there aren't, we'll know Pip's theory is wrong and we can go back to normal maintenance. And if the modification damages the communication array? Commander asked. Then we'll fix it, said simply. But Commander, if there are hostile ships conducting surveillance on this station, don't we need to know about it? The silence stretched for several long seconds. Could see various members of the senior staff exchanging glances, apparently having some kind of wordless conversation about protocol and chain of command, and the wisdom of trusting two humans and a small alien with sensitive station operations. Finally, Commander spoke. What is the probability that this modification will successfully reveal cloaked ships, assuming they exist? 94.7%, Pip replied immediately. I have run extensive calculations based on known cloaking technology parameters and electromagnetic interference patterns, and the probability of permanent damage to the communication array. Less than 2%, assuming proper implementation of the modifications. And the probability that you are correct about the existence of these ships. Pip was quiet for a moment and felt the tiny alien shift position slightly on his shoulder. Based purely on statistical analysis of the sensor data, approximately 87%. However, I acknowledge that my interpretation methods are unconventional. Chief looked at Commander. Your orders, Commander. Proceed with the test, she said finally. But I want full damage control teams standing by, and if this modification causes any permanent damage to station systems, all three of you will be spending the next 6 months scrubbing waste recycling filters with manual brushes. Felt relief flood through him. Yes, ma'am, we're ready to proceed whenever you give the word. I will coordinate with the sensor control room, Chief said, apparently resigned to the situation. When we activate the pulse, all sensor arrays will be focused on the target area. If there is anything to see, we will see it. The next few minutes were filled with technical preparations and safety protocols, and made final adjustments to the modified communication array while Pip provided real-time calculations for optimal pulse timing and frequency. Various department heads positioned themselves at monitoring stations throughout the control room. All stations report ready, Chief announced from his position at the main tactical display. Pulse generator charged and ready, confirmed, her hands hovering over the activation controls. Optimal target window opens in 37 seconds, Pip announced, apparently calculating orbital mechanics in real time. Found himself holding his breath as the countdown proceeded. If they were wrong, they just made themselves look like idiots in front of the entire senior staff. If they were right. 15 seconds, Pip called out. All sensors focused and recording, Lieutenant reported, his earlier hostility replaced by obvious tension. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2, 1, activate pulse. Triggered the modification, and the communication array discharged its modified electromagnetic pulse into space. For a moment, nothing happened. The various displays around the control room showed empty space, normal background radiation, and the distant glow of the 3 purple moons. Then the sensors erupted with activity. Contact, Lieutenant shouted, his scales rattling with excitement. 3 ships bearing 127 Mark 54 range approximately 300,000 kilometers. Second contact bearing 23 Mark 12, someone else called out. Third contact confirmed, bearing 291 Mark 78. The main tactical display filled with new information as the station's sensors locked onto the briefly visible ships. Stared at the readouts, feeling a mixture of vindication and growing concern. The ships were large, heavily armed, and definitely not broadcasting any kind of identification signals. Ship configurations unknown, Chief reported, his voice now completely professional. Weapons signatures suggest military-grade equipment. They're recloaking now, but we have their positions. Analysis of ship designs indicates probable Pirate Confederation vessels, Pip announced from shoulder. Configuration matches known raider patterns from this sector. How long have they been out there? Commander demanded. Based on the sensor data patterns, at least 3 weeks, Pip replied. Possibly longer. 3 weeks of surveillance, the commander said grimly. They know our patrol schedules, our defensive capabilities, our supply runs. They're planning an attack, realized. That's why they're jamming our communications intermittently. They want to isolate us when they make their move. Chief was already moving toward the communications station. I need immediate contact with Sector Command. Priority Alpha emergency protocols. Sir, Lieutenant called out, the communication array is still cycling down from the electromagnetic pulse. Full communications won't be available for another 6 minutes. Then we improvise, said, moving toward the modified array. Pip, can we use the modification in reverse? Instead of jamming cloaking technology, can we punch through their communication jamming? Theoretically possible, Pip replied, the tiny alien's crest brightening with calculation. We would need to recalibrate the frequency generators and reverse the harmonic filters. Do it, Commander ordered, whatever it takes to get word to Sector Command. And worked frantically to reconfigure the communication array while Pip provided constant guidance and calculations. Around them, the senior staff coordinated defensive preparations and tried to track the movement of the now invisible ships. Complete, announced, ready to attempt communication breakthrough. All stations prepare for possible hostile action, Commander announced over the station's general communication system. This is not a drill. Defense Condition Alpha is now in effect. Triggered the modified communication pulse, and suddenly the static that had been plaguing their long-range communications cleared completely. The main communication display showed a clean connection to Sector Command, 12 light towers away. Sector Command, this is Outpost Zeta 7, Chief said into the communication pickup. We have confirmed hostile vessels conducting surveillance operations in our vicinity, requesting immediate support and tactical guidance. The response came back within seconds. Zeta 7, this is Admiral Harrison at Sector Command. We've been monitoring increased pirate activity in your area for the past month. How many ships are we dealing with? At least 3 confirmed, possibly more. They've been using advanced cloaking technology and coordinated jamming to avoid detection. Understood. Battle Group 7 is en route to your position, but they're 18 hours out. Can you maintain defensive posture until support arrives? Looked around the control room at the various species working frantically to prepare the station's defenses. Checking weapon systems, coordinating shield generators, calculating optimal defensive positions. And in the middle of it all, one tiny who had figured out the whole situation by listening to gravitational data as music. Admiral, Chief replied, we'll be ready for them. As the control room bustled with defensive preparations, Pip hopped down from shoulder and approached the sensor control station. The tiny alien said quietly, I believe there may be additional modifications we can make to the defensive systems. The integration project I showed you yesterday could be implemented much more quickly than originally calculated. Looked at the tactical display showing the positions of the hostile ships, then at his small roommate who had just saved the entire station from a surprise attack. What do you need? He asked. Approximately 4 hours, access to the primary defense grid, and engineer's assistance with the human-designed components, Pip replied. Also, it would be helpful if Command could avoid questioning our methods until after the pirate attack has been repelled. Commander, who had been monitoring their conversation, stepped closer. Pip, are you saying you can improve our defensive capabilities significantly in the next 4 hours? I am saying that if an engineer are willing to assist with some additional unauthorized modifications, those pirate ships are going to discover that attacking this station was a serious tactical error. Grinned and looked at who was already rolling up her sleeves. I think we can manage that. As alarms continued to sound throughout the station, and various species prepared for battle in their own ways, realized that his quiet assignment to a monitoring station had just become the most important job in the sector. But looking at Pip's confident expression and the innovative defensive modifications scrolling across the display screens, he was beginning to think the pirates had picked the wrong station to attack. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of frantic activity that would have been chaos if not for Pip's systematic approach to integrating the station's defensive systems. found himself crawling through maintenance tunnels he hadn't known existed, splicing together power conduits that had been designed by 3 different species according to completely incompatible engineering philosophies. "Pass me the quantum resonance calibrator," called from somewhere deeper in the tunnel system. "The precision array is throwing off the harmonic balance." "Which one is the quantum resonance calibrator?" called back, looking at a collection of tools that seemed to have been designed by alien engineers who had fundamentally different ideas about what tools should look like. "The blue one that hums when you hold it wrong." Pip's voice drifted down from the access panel above them, where the tiny alien was somehow managing to coordinate modifications to systems spanning half the station. Grabbed what he hoped was the right tool and passed it through the tunnel, too. "How are we doing on time?" "Integration is proceeding ahead of schedule," Pip reported. "However, I am detecting increased gravitational fluctuations from the pirate vessels. I believe they are preparing for their attack." In the main control room, Commander was coordinating with the various department heads while keeping one eye on the tactical display. The invisible ships had been moving into attack positions for the past hour, their presence detectable only through the subtle gravitational anomalies that Pip continued to track through musical data interpretation. "Status report on defensive modifications," she called out to the engineering team. "Deflector array integration complete," Chief Engineer rumbled from his position at the structural systems console. "Power efficiency increased by 41%. Electromagnetic barriers synchronized with human armor plating protocols," reported Engineering Officer. "Coverage expanded by 67% with no additional power requirements. Precision targeting systems now linked to all defensive arrays," announced Lieutenant with obvious pride. "Accuracy improvement calculated at 93%. From her position at the main engineering station, Chief looked impressed despite himself. "In 4 hours, you have achieved integration that our best engineers estimated would take 6 months. "The foundation work was already completed by Pip," said, emerging from the maintenance tunnel with grease stains on his uniform and a massive grin on his face. "We just had to implement the connections." "And ignore approximately 47 different safety protocols," added cheerfully, climbing out of a different access panel. "But the theoretical framework was solid." "Contact," Lieutenant suddenly shouted from the sensor station. "Multiple ships at attack range." The main tactical display exploded with activity as 6 pirate vessels materialized in space around the station. They were larger than the earlier reconnaissance had suggested, and their weapon signatures indicated they were carrying enough firepower to reduce Outpost Zeta 7 to component atoms. "6 ships," Commander said grimly. "Battle configuration suggests coordinated assault pattern." "Incoming transmission," the communications officer reported. "Put it through," the commander ordered. The voice that came through the speakers was electronically modified, but the arrogance was unmistakable. "Outpost Zeta 7, this is Captain Vex of the Crimson Fleet. You have exactly 10 minutes to transfer all station personnel to evacuation pods before we begin harvesting your technology and supplies. Any resistance will result in the immediate destruction of your station." "Standard pirate intimidation tactics," Chief observed. "They want to avoid damaging valuable equipment and supplies." "Response," the communications officer asked. Commander looked around the control room at the various species who had spent the last 4 hours working together to prepare for this moment, stood ready at the structural defense stations, coordinated the electromagnetic barrier systems, managed precision targeting arrays, and in the middle of it all, 2 humans and a tiny waited to find out if their impossible integration project would actually work. "Tell Captain Vex that Outpost Zeta 7 declines his generous offer," she said calmly. "Ma'am," the communications officer asked, apparently uncertain he had heard correctly. "You heard the commander," called out from the engineering station. "Tell them we're not going anywhere." The response from Captain Vex was immediate and predictable. "Your choice, station personnel, don't say we didn't warn you." The tactical display showed the pirate ships moving into attack formation, their weapons powering up with the distinctive energy signatures of military-grade plasma cannons and photon torpedoes. Felt his stomach tighten as he realized just how they were. Even with the defensive improvements, 6 warships against a monitoring station seemed like overwhelming odds. All defense systems to full power, Commander ordered. Prepare for incoming fire. Defensive grid integration at maximum efficiency, Pip reported from the engineering station, apparently unconcerned by the approaching destruction. All systems synchronized and responding correctly. Here they come, Chief announced. The first wave of pirate fire lit up space around the station like a deadly fireworks display. Plasma cannon bursts and photon torpedoes streaked toward Outpost Zeta 7 in coordinated salvos designed to overwhelm any conventional defense system. Then Pip's integrated defensive grid came online, and something remarkable happened. The deflector arrays created localized gravitational distortions that bent the incoming plasma fire away from the station. The electromagnetic barriers absorbed the energy from the deflected weapons and channeled it directly into the human-designed armor plating, which converted the absorbed energy into additional power for the defensive grid. The precision arrays calculated optimal distribution of defensive resources and automatically adjusted barrier strength and deflector positioning in real time. Instead of being overwhelmed by the pirate attack, the station's defenses seemed to grow stronger with each incoming salvo. Impossible, Captain Vex's voice crackled over the communication channel. No monitoring station has that level of defensive capability. Defensive efficiency increased to 137% of calculated maximum, Pip announced with obvious satisfaction. The system is actually using the pirates' own weapon energy to strengthen our barriers. Return fire, Commander ordered. The station's weapon systems, now enhanced by the same integration principles that had revolutionized the defensive grid, responded with devastating accuracy. Precision targeting allowed the weapons to track the maneuvering pirate ships with impossible accuracy. Structural engineering ensured that the weapon mounts could handle the increased power loads. Energy management systems coordinated power distribution to maintain continuous fire. The first pirate ship to be hit by the integrated weapon systems simply disintegrated. The second ship lost main power and began drifting helplessly through space. The third ship's captain apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and began transmitting surrender signals. This is impossible, Captain Vex's voice now carried a note of panic. You're a monitoring station. You're not supposed to have warship-level capabilities. Captain Vex said, taking the communication pickup from the officer, I think you made a serious tactical error. Who is this? This is Technician, and I'd like you to meet my roommate. Gestured to Pip, who had climbed onto the communication console and was regarding the tactical display with those enormous multifaceted eyes. Your roommate? Meet Pip said with a grin. Pip doesn't like it when people threaten our home. Pip leaned toward the communication pickup, the tiny alien's musical voice somehow carrying a note of polite menace. Captain Vex, your remaining ships have two options. You may surrender immediately and accept processing by Galactic Defense Corps personnel, or you may continue this attack and discover what other modifications we have made to this station's defensive capabilities. You're bluffing, Captain Vex replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Pip asked innocently. Then the tiny alien turned to the tactical officer. Please demonstrate the enhanced targeting system's precision capabilities by shooting the communication array off Captain Vex's ship. Avoid damaging any other systems. The weapons officer looked to Commander, who nodded. A single, precisely targeted beam lanced out from the station and neatly severed the communication array from Captain Vex's flagship, leaving the rest of the ship completely undamaged. That was a warning shot, Pip announced over the general communication frequency. The next shot will target your life support systems, individually, starting with your personal quarters, Captain Vex. The surrender signals from the remaining pirate ships began transmitting within 30 seconds. Battle Group 7, this is Outpost Zeta 7, Commander said into the main communication pickup. Hostile vessels have surrendered. Request prisoner transport and salvage vessels for recovered pirate ships. Zeta 7, this is Admiral Harrison. Did you say the pirates surrendered? How did a monitoring station defeat 6 warships? Commander looked around the control room at the various species who had worked together to achieve the impossible, then at the 2 humans and Tiny who had made it all work. Admiral, I believe the official report will indicate that our defensive systems performed above expected parameters due to innovative engineering modifications by our technical staff. Understood, Zeta-7. We'll want a full technical briefing when we arrive. As the immediate crisis wound down and various department heads began coordinating prisoner transfer procedures and damage assessment, found himself standing next to Pip at the engineering station. So, he said to his tiny roommate, that was quite a first week on the job. Pip's crest shifted to a warm golden color that was learning indicated contentment. I believe this collaboration has proven most successful. The integration of diverse technological approaches yielded results that exceeded all calculated expectations. What's our next project? Asked. I have been analyzing the station's environmental control systems, Pip said thoughtfully. I believe there may be opportunities for significant improvements to efficiency and comfort across all species' habitat requirements. Authorized improvements. Well, Pip said with what was certain was mischief in the musical voice. I believe we have demonstrated that sometimes the best results come from creative interpretation of standard procedures. Looked around the control room at the aftermath of their impossible victory, then at his brilliant, innovative, rule-breaking roommate who turned sensor data into music and saw connections that shouldn't exist. Pip, he said with a grin, I think this is going to be the beginning of a beautiful partnership. As Outpost Zeta-7 settled back into routine operations with significantly enhanced defensive capabilities, and 6 captured pirate ships waiting for Battle Group 7, realized that his quiet assignment to a monitoring station had become something much more important. He had become part of a team that proved what was possible when different species worked together, when conventional wisdom was challenged by innovative thinking, and when humans and their allies refused to accept that anything was truly impossible. 3 weeks after the pirate attack, Outpost Zeta-7 had become the most famous monitoring station in the sector. Battle Group 7 had arrived to find 6 surrendered pirate vessels, a defensive grid that operated at impossible efficiency levels, and a crew of mixed-species personnel who had somehow achieved what the Galactic Engineering Council declared was theoretically impossible. Was trying to explain the integration process to his 5th team of visiting engineers that week, when Pip emerged from the Environmental Control Access Panel with what appeared to be a component that had been completely redesigned according to principles that didn't appear in any engineering manual. The tiny alien announced, I have completed the atmospheric processor modifications. The station can now maintain optimal environmental conditions for 17 different species simultaneously while using 63% less power than previous systems. 17 species? Asked Dr. Ra, the lead engineer from the Galactic Defense Corps Technical Evaluation Team. This station was designed for a maximum of 8 species with significant environmental overlap. The previous system treated each species' requirements as separate problems requiring individual solutions, Pip explained, climbing onto his shoulder with the practiced ease of 3 weeks of partnership. However, when you analyze atmospheric requirements as overlapping spectrums rather than discrete categories, you discover opportunities for elegant integration. Dr. Ra examined the readouts on her portable analyzer, her expression shifting from skepticism to amazement. These efficiency ratings are extraordinary. How did you achieve this level of optimization? Creative interpretation of standard engineering procedures, said with a straight face, ignoring snort of laughter from across the room. What engineer means, Commander interjected diplomatically, is that our technical staff has developed innovative approaches to system integration that exceed conventional parameters. Innovative approaches, Dr. Ra repeated. Is that what we're calling unauthorized modifications that violate approximately 60 different safety protocols? Only if they don't work, Pip said cheerfully. If they work, they become groundbreaking engineering innovations that demonstrate the value of interspecies collaboration. Dr. Ra looked like she wasn't sure whether to file a safety violation report or recommend Pip for a medal. The results are undeniable, but the methods... The methods, interrupted a new voice from the entrance to the environmental control room, are exactly why I'm here. Everyone turned to see Admiral Harrison entering the room, accompanied by an individual that didn't recognize. someone wearing the insignia of the Galactic Engineering Council's Advanced Research Division. "Admiral," Commander said, coming to attention, "I wasn't aware you were still in the sector." "I stayed to observe the integration projects firsthand," Admiral Harrison replied, "and to introduce Dr. Aura from the Engineering Council's Advanced Research Division." Dr. Aura stepped forward, their crystalline form refracting the environmental control room's lighting into complex patterns. "Technician, Pip, engineer, your modifications to this station's systems have created significant interest in the research division." "What kind of interest?" asked cautiously. "The kind that involves offering you positions with unlimited research budgets and authorization to ignore standard procedures whenever innovation requires it," Dr. Aura replied. Pip's crest immediately shifted to brilliant gold and began cycling through every color in the visible spectrum. "Unlimited research budgets and authorization to ignore standard procedures," added with obvious enthusiasm. "The Advanced Research Division has been tasked with developing next-generation space station technology," Admiral Harrison explained. "Your integration approach represents a fundamental breakthrough in multi-species engineering cooperation. However," Dr. Aura continued, "we understand that you have developed an effective working relationship here on Outpost Zeta 7. We would not want to disrupt a productive team dynamic." Looked around the environmental control room at the systems they had modified, improved, and occasionally completely redesigned over the past 3 weeks. Then he looked at Commander, who had somehow managed to provide official support for their unauthorized modifications while maintaining plausible deniability for herself and the station. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "Outpost Zeta 7 becomes the Advanced Research Division's primary testing facility for integrated defense and habitat systems," Admiral Harrison said. "Your team continues to work here, but with expanded authority and resources to develop the next generation of space station technology." "Essentially," Dr. Aura added, "you would be paid to do exactly what you've been doing, but with official authorization and unlimited access to cutting-edge technology from across the galaxy." "And no more safety violation reports?" asked hopefully. "Safety violation reports would be replaced with innovation documentation and peer review processes," Dr. Aura confirmed. Pip hopped down from shoulder and began packing in small circles, apparently processing the implications at typical speed. "This proposal would allow us to investigate integration possibilities across entire categories of space-based technology: propulsion systems, communication arrays, defensive grids, habitat modules, life support systems, artificial gravity generators, quantum communication networks," added, feeling excitement building as he considered the possibilities. "Weapon systems, shield generators, sensor arrays," contributed with a grin that suggested she was already planning modifications that would horrify traditional engineers. The Advanced Research Division would also provide access to technology from species that are not typically represented in standard Galactic Defense Corps installations, Dr. Aura said. "We have established research partnerships with the Collective of Thinking Machines, the Crystalline Communes, and several energy-based civilizations." Thinking machines. Pip's excitement was now clearly visible in the rapid color changes of the tiny alien's crest. "Energy-based civilizations? The integration possibilities would be extraordinary." Commander cleared her throat politely. "While I am pleased that my technical staff has attracted such positive attention, I should point out that Outpost Zeta 7 serves critical monitoring functions for this sector. Any research activities would need to be compatible with our primary mission." "Actually," Admiral Harrison said with what thought might be amusement, "your enhanced defensive capabilities have made this station the most secure facility in the sector. Command is considering relocating several sensitive monitoring operations here, specifically because of the improvements your team has implemented." Enhanced defensive capabilities that were the result of unauthorized modifications by personnel who had been assigned to routine maintenance duties, Dr. Ra pointed out, apparently still struggling with the concept. "Dr. Ra," Pip said politely, climbing back onto his shoulder, "may I suggest that perhaps the problem is not unauthorized modifications, but rather authorization procedures that are insufficiently flexible to accommodate innovative approaches to engineering challenges." "What do you mean?" Traditional authorization procedures require extensive documentation, committee review, and approval processes that can take months or years to complete. This approach works well for conventional engineering projects, but it cannot accommodate the rapid prototyping and iterative development that characterizes breakthrough innovation. Found himself nodding as Pip continued. What if authorization procedures were modified to allow technical personnel to implement innovations immediately, with documentation and review following successful demonstration of concept? That would be completely contrary to established safety protocols, Dr. Ra protested. But it would be consistent with how actual innovation occurs, Dr. Ara observed. Most significant technological advances in galactic history have resulted from individuals or small teams implementing unconventional approaches without prior authorization. The Advanced Research Division operates under modified protocols that prioritize innovation over procedural compliance, Admiral Harrison added. Results are evaluated based on effectiveness and safety, not adherence to pre-existing procedures. Commander looked thoughtful. And Outpost Zeta 7 would continue to serve its monitoring functions while also serving as a testing facility for integrated systems development. With significantly enhanced resources and support, Dr. Ara confirmed, plus access to technology and expertise from across the galaxy, plus the opportunity to work on projects that could revolutionize space station designed for every species in the galactic community, Admiral Harrison added. Looked at his teammates, with her enthusiasm for hands-on problem-solving, Pip with genius-level innovation and complete disregard for conventional limitations, and Commander who had somehow made it all possible by supporting their unauthorized modifications while maintaining plausible deniability. "What do you think, Pip?" he asked his tiny roommate. "I think," Pip said with obvious satisfaction, "that this opportunity would allow us to explore integration possibilities that I have only theorized about previously. Also, unlimited research budgets suggest that we could obtain significantly more sophisticated tools and materials." "I think it sounds like the best job in the galaxy," she replied with a grin. "When do we start?" "You already have," Dr. Ara said. "Your work over the past 3 weeks constitutes the Advanced Research Division's most successful project to date. We're simply making it official." As the meeting concluded and various officials began discussing administrative details, found himself back in his quarters with Pip, looking out at the stars through their viewport. The 3 purple moons hung in space like jewels, and in the distance, he could see the running lights of patrol ships from Battle Group 7. "Pip," he said thoughtfully, "when I was assigned to this station, I thought I was being sent to a quiet posting where nothing interesting would happen." "And instead," Pip prompted from the tiny alien's custom desk. "Instead, I found out that interesting things happen whenever you combine different perspectives and refuse to accept that anything is impossible." Pip's crest shifted to warm gold. "I have learned similar lessons about the value of partnership and collaborative innovation. Also, I have learned that humans possess remarkable tolerance for unconventional approaches to problem solving." "What's our next project?" "I have been analyzing long-range sensor data from the outer system," Pip said, manipulating holographic displays that showed star charts and gravitational readings. "There are some fascinating anomalies in the quantum foam patterns near the neutron star cluster that might benefit from investigation." "Authorized investigation?" "Well," Pip said with musical laughter, "we do now have authorization to ignore standard procedures whenever innovation requires it." Grinned as he looked out at the stars. His assignment to Outpost Zeta 7 had started with a tiny alien roommate who turned sensor data into music, and had somehow become a partnership that was revolutionizing space station technology for the entire galaxy. It was, he reflected, exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans seem to excel at handling. And with Pip as a partner, unlimited research budgets, and official authorization to ignore any procedure that got in the way of innovation, suspected their best work was still ahead of them. After all, the universe was full of problems that conventional wisdom declared unsolvable. And as they had already proven, when humans and their allies decided something was possible, the universe had a tendency to cooperate. Outside their viewport, the stars waited for the next breakthrough that would come from 2 engineers, a tiny genius, and a complete willingness to ignore the word impossible whenever it got in the way of progress. The pirates had learned the hard way that attacking a station defended by integrated alien technology, human stubbornness, and a tiny genius who believed that unauthorized modifications were just another way of saying creative problem-solving. After all, they were about to discover what happened when you threatened a position defended by human stubbornness, genius, and a complete willingness to ignore standard procedures in favor of whatever worked. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that humans seem to excel at handling, and himself, genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead. After all, how often did you get the chance to work with someone who viewed the impossible as merely an engineering challenge waiting for the right approach?